Imagine one night armed government representatives show up at your home unannounced and on trumped up charges arrest you, your spouse, and your kids, and then haul you off in separate trucks to various detention centers. It gets worse. What if after 2 years of confinement and indescribable abuse, your captors make you an offer? Remain here indefinitely or accept a quote-unquote factory assignment. It stays worse. Today we're joined by Reginald Smith, a research analyst with advanced degrees in mechanical engineering and business and a specialist in renewable energy, now working for asset manager Eventide Investments as they examine possible investment targets for their potential to promote or harm human flourishing. Join us as Reggie unfolds more of this story and details what choices we can make as consumers and investors to make this story less common. We'll learn all that and more right now on the Retirement Lifestyle Show.
Welcome to the Retirement Lifestyle Show. I'm your co-host, Roshan Loungani, here with Adrian Nicholson and Erik Olson as usual, and we also have a special guest with us today. We've got Reginald Smith, who goes by Reggie, who's with Eventide Asset Management, and we are really excited to have you join us today. We can't wait to hear more about you, the firm, and specifically one project. Erik, you and Reggie met at a conference. Can you share that story and give Reggie a brief introduction for us?
Yeah, so Reggie works with Eventide Investments, and they had a due diligence meeting in the end of May out at their headquarters in Boston. So they invited me to come learn more and have direct interaction with some of the research analysts and portfolio managers and others that make their investment process work. And one of the presentations that was given over those 2 days was one that was given by Reggie. It was really it was eye-opening. It was moving. It took what we have as an understanding about generalities in things that are taking place in the manufacturing sector in China and turned them into sort of specific knowledge that I thought, wow, it's really worth knowing more about this and bringing this opportunity to our listeners. So I asked Reggie if he wouldn't mind taking some of his time to come speak with us and thereby to give you as well, our listener, a window into what's taking place in this sector and how you, from the vantage point of having a life full of impact, whether that's in terms of your giving, that's in terms of your shopping, that's in your volunteering or in your investing, that have a better base of information on which to make those sorts of decisions. So let me just give you a little bit of Reggie's background because it's really impressive. So as I said, he's a research analyst at Eventide, and his main focus is evaluating and monitoring new investment opportunities with a special focus on clean energy. Hence today, our conversation in large part about solar panels. Prior to that, Reggie was working at Johnson Controls. He was there for 5 years, and that was focused on developing large energy conservation projects and solar projects, and then subsequently led the development engineering for an energy storage startup business within that firm. So he's got an MBA with high distinction from Harvard Business School and a bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering from Drexel University, and was clearly has a pedigree here academically that most of us would envy, and that showed up in the course of the presentation that he did. So, Reggie, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have you with us today.
Erik, thanks so much for the kind introduction. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you all and hopefully share just how important it is for us to really understand supply chains and focus in particular on a extremely critical industry, solar, and the solar industry, which is a global industry that's going to be very important in the years ahead.
Well, great. So, as our listeners understand, when we have a guest, we would love to just start off with a little bit of your story. Tell us your story and how it was that you came to Eventide. You were there, you finished school, you were at Johnson Controls. What led to that path ultimately coming to where you are now?
Yeah, so let me start off actually when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I grew up in Philadelphia and we had a 2-inch snowstorm. And I remember looking out my window just in love with the snow. I mean, who falls in love with the snow as a kid? Well, I guess a lot of people do, especially since it means you don't have to go to school. But for me, it was something a little bit deeper. I just became fascinated with it. I had to know when it would snow next. And I basically fell in love with the weather and studying the weather. So I started doing my own research. Trust me, this is going somewhere. It all leads to Eventide. But I started studying the weather, learning meteorology on my own. At that point, the internet was starting to develop with a lot of resources. And uh, by 12 years old, I was creating my own forecasts and doing, forecasts in my teens for friends, family. And when I was always good at math and science. And so when I was making a school decision, I decided to do engineering. And I also wanted to get skills that I could use to help other people build infrastructure like roads and bridges in developing countries. I thought that would be a great thing to know how to do. But I had this love for the weather. And so I sort of just smushed the two together, engineering and weather, and out came renewable energy. So roughly my sophomore year of college, I just was like, I'm going to focus on renewables. So I tried to, arrange all my classes to get as much in the field as I could. And during that time, I also uh, started a Facebook weather page. I was picked up by a local newspaper in Philadelphia, and I used to do radio and weekly forecasts and all types. I had an app on the iPhone, but I continued on with the engineering, and I always just focused on the renewables. So I got into energy efficiency technology at Johnson Controls. You think of if a university says, I want to become energy efficient. Well, how do you do that? Well, you look at all the energy use points of a facility, from the heating and cooling to the lighting to all the appliances, and you figure out ways to make that more energy efficient. So I did that for about 3.5 years in school districts, hospitals, and then uh, continuing with my passion towards renewables, opportunities came up for me to focus on that more specifically. So I joined that particular team, and then it eventually blossomed into helping build a startup business in energy storage that also involved a lot of solar work. And then I decided, well, this is great. I've sort of accomplished everything I want to know technologically, but I want to take it all to the next level. I want to be involved in shaping the industry from a larger standpoint and hopefully have an impact in building it out. And so I thought, money, um, finance really directs and shapes a lot of our industries. And so the next place that I wanted to go was really in investing and being able to enable these projects from that side. And so I went to business school. And when I was in business school, about 8 months in, I had actually met one of the founders of Eventide, Finney Cruvilla, previously, but he came to my campus and did a presentation. And my jaw was pretty much on the floor after that. I was like, what? This is what you're doing? Investing that makes the world rejoice? Oh, and you're looking for someone who knows renewable energy? So it was just a perfect match. And I was actually largely through my recruiting already. So it all worked out amazingly well. I look back and I'm just really thankful for. I give the credit to God for just how all the pieces came into place. I did 10 weeks of internship at a investment bank in Chicago called Marathon Capital, and then I did 3 weeks at the end of my summer at Eventide Asset Management. And I was fortunate enough; both of them gave me an offer, and I chose Eventide. So as you mentioned, we're a values-based investment firm out of Boston. Our mission is and our purpose is to honor God and serve our clients by investing in companies that create compelling value for the global common good. So we're looking for companies that create what we call human flourishing, that genuinely benefit the world. And in pursuing this global common good, we recognize the potential of renewable energy It has numerous benefits to society and has a true ability to contribute to this human flourishing. And so it's really an important theme for us to pursue in our investing.
Well, that is a great story. And so, and interesting. I had no idea that at the time you were hired, or at least that you were recruited, that the firm was actually looking to build out its capability in that sector. So that what a timely thing. So, but in addition, or let me maybe ask this question slightly differently. So, was it your passion about alternative energy in general, or the energy sector and renewable energy in particular, or was it your awareness of some of the practices in the manufacturing sector in China, or was it Eventide's awareness of and focus on that led to your developing what apparently is a very specialized knowledge in the extent to which there is forced labor as part of the value chain in the manufacturing process for solar panels. How did that come to pass?
Yeah, yeah, and before I dive into that, I'll just say a quick disclaimer that nothing I say should be taken as investment advice.
Okay.
So we in our yeah,
Well, just so you know, we
our
always are
compliance.
saying that same thing, so you're right on the same page with us. So thank you for doing that, issuing that disclaimer.
Great, excellent. Yeah, so in our normal course of business here at Eventide, we're constantly monitoring our investments for uh, alignment or disalignment, or uh, in what we call our business 360 approach. And in this approach, we look for companies that are creating value across different areas. For example, the customers that they serve, the employees that they hire, the supply chain, the community it operates in, society broadly, and the environment. And this is something that's ongoing. So even if we're invested in a company, we're continuing to look at it through this lens. And in February of 2021, we started to see some headlines that were connecting solar to forced labor in China. As we looked into this, it turns out that tomato paste and cotton had already been banned from this particular region of China called Xinjiang. It's Xinjiang, it's the westernmost province of China, and it's become an industrial center within China as industrialization has expanded across their country. And so as we looked into it, we began to uncover some things. Now, what I would like to do is, in sort of, before I get into the nuts and bolts of solar, I'd like to maybe bring it to life for you, um, and take you and our audience to Xinjiang in 2017. And uh, let's imagine for a second that you are the head of a household in Xinjiang with a spouse and three children, and you live in, typical house in that area. It's relatively small, maybe has 3 rooms or so, and someone comes knocking at your door randomly in the afternoon. It's a sunny day. They come banging on your door, and you go to the door. You open it up, and it's military personnel, and they hand you a piece of paper, and it says that you're under arrest and you have to report immediately to a prison. And you're looking at the charges, and you're very confused in it. The charges are that you have WhatsApp on your phone, that you use too much electricity, and that you have too many children. And so at this point, you're like, I mean, there's got to be something wrong. You're an upstanding citizen. You've never committed any crime. And what they do is they immediately grab you, handcuff you, and throw you in a vehicle. And as you look back, you see the same thing happening to your wife. She's being handcuffed. She's being grabbed, put in another vehicle. And when you're further down the road, you see your children also getting taken away in a third vehicle somewhere else. And so at this point, your life is completely in shambles. You have no idea what's happening. You don't know why you're being arrested. And of course, you're very frustrated and, very, very sad by what is happening. You show up to a max security prison, huge walls, uh, you know, gating, fencing, security guards, guns pointed everywhere, and you register. They check you in, and immediately you're taken to a torture chamber where uh, you're tortured and sort of forced to confess that you might be a terrorist or you're sort of up to no good. And they torture you with electrocution, your electric shocks, and you are then thrown into the main area of the prison, which is nothing but bunk beds. There's a bucket in the corner where you use the bathroom. There at least are showers built, but you get 3 minutes on a timer to use those. And the next morning, you wake up and you have to report to an educational room where you sing songs to the CCP and you learn Mandarin, which you already know, but you're learning Mandarin.
Right. Those of our
You then,
listeners, Reggie, that don't know the CCP, that's the Chinese Communist Party.
that's
Yeah.
right, yes, the Chinese Communist Party. So your next day in this camp is more torture and more harassment. You might, if you showed up late to the educational segment of the day, you might get beaten by guards. And the same thing is happening to your spouse. And she is witnessing even worse atrocities committed towards women. They are undergoing the same form of torture, but also forced sterilizations. Your spouse is forcibly sterilized, there's forced abortions, and reports of many issues of sexual violence towards women. Your children are taken to a re-education sort of boarding school. They're completely separated from their parents. You don't know if you're going to see them again, and you are in this camp for roughly 2 years, and it's the same thing every day. Confessions, you're writing down things that you should have never done wrong, or things that are saying that you've done wrong, sort of making up confessions, more singing to the CCP, more education, more torture. And after 2 years of this, you go down to the administration building and they give you another piece of paper. And this time they say, if you sign here, you can leave the camp. You can leave this internment camp or prison. And so you're very happy to do that, but you're going to have to go work for a company. And so you sign and you figure, well, out of this camp must be better than inside. So you happily sign. They take you, it's an hour away, they take you to this company. There's still a internment camp style living facility. You're constantly monitored. Your life is very regimented and controlled by other people. And the work you arrive there is mining, and they give you some mining equipment. There's mining equipment and some hand tools like shovels, etc. for this mining operation, and it's for sand. And you're thinking to yourself, why are we mining sand or hire a particular type? It's a bit like rock. It's called quartzite. And it turns out that you are mining the sand that will go into and help create up to 97% of the world's solar panels. So this was back in 2017 to 2020 where that would have been the case. And we began to discover this supply chain, like I said, in February 2021. Now, your spouse similarly could go work at another company somewhere or be released, but life outside of the camps isn't much better. People are constantly surveilled. They have barcodes on your house where they can scan it and get all your information, including health information. You might have to swipe to get out of your block or go into a store. Your location and movements are constantly monitored. There's been Han Chinese people. So the people who are being oppressed they're called the Uyghur people. It's a Turkic Muslim population in Western China. There's about 12 million of them, of course, in a 1.2 or 3 billion person population in China. So they're an extreme minority. And China is really destroying their culture. So a lot of their religious sites have been destroyed. Their homes have been remodeled. Uh, People outside of the camp have to report to a community center every day to sing to the Communist Party of China, to sing songs to the CCP. You could be arrested in a moment if you do anything suspicious. Like I said, very arbitrary things like having WhatsApp on your phone or talking to a relative outside of China, traveling outside of China. These folks are being completely controlled, and many countries have called it a genocide. Uh, the birth rates are lower today in Xinjiang than they were during the Ugandan genocide. One quote by um, a lady, her name is Joanne Finley at Newcastle University. She says it's not immediate, shocking, mass killing on the spot type of genocide, but it's slow, painful, creeping genocide. And so these people are really being slowly destroyed by the Communist Party in China. And so we uh, um, took this took this story to clean energy companies, and um, I'll I'll actually stop right here and see if there's any questions, and then I can explain really what happened next.
Yeah, well, I just want to draw up the importance of that 360 scope you kind of mentioned, where sometimes you just look at numbers when it comes to businesses or products or services or whatever it is. But sometimes you don't really look at the story behind how this product or service or business draws out their bottom line. And that story you shared about these families being torn apart and going to these camps is it's very intense and very sad. And that's the importance of just looking not at just the numbers, but the overall organization, business, the supply chain. How do those raw materials, like you said, that sand or what they were mining becomes into a solar panel, where it's now more important than ever just to be aware about that, because some people might be investing in it, they may not know, and just bringing these stories to light is just extremely important. And I guess this will kind of lead into the question: are do you know any type of like parties or organizations that are standing up or helping out these families that are being separated and are going through these process? Are there any type of like stories you're hearing where people are trying to combat this or trying to fix this issue in this like this really terrible instance of supply chain where it's destroying communities in a way?
Absolutely, yeah. So the there's human rights groups that have been really sort of making noise about this and trying to uh, bring it to public consciousness and make people more aware of what's happening. So to give more context, it, over 1 million Uyghur people have been put in these internment camps, and we believe this is probably the biggest human rights crisis since World War II. We're talking millions of people being affected by this. There have been probably somewhere close to 100,000 Uyghur people. It's hard to get the exact number that have been transported across China to work in other industries uh, as forced labor. And we know it's forced labor because we know that 100% of the Uyghur people cannot choose to go and do this, right? And many are are doing this under the threat of being sent back to the camps, right? And China has had um, poverty, what they call poverty alleviation or labor transfer programs in place for years in various ways, much of the time presumed to be voluntary, but this is different. And so we see human rights groups really creating a lot of noise. And thankfully, the United States government has begun to take action. I would say for a few year period, very little was done until the end of 2020 when products were banned, as I mentioned earlier, on cotton and tomato paste, because a lot of the or some of the forced labor is actually used for cotton picking, and this area produces 30% of the world's cotton. So that's a huge problem. And then uh, the ban was, it's called the Hoshin WRO. This was in June of 2021, banned Hoshin, which is a solar raw material provider that supplied 16% of this particular raw material to for the world solar panels. Now, let me explain this a little bit further. So you can think of making a solar panel in 3 steps. And the first step is raw materials. So you got to mine the sand and then heat it up and create metallurgical silicon. That's step one. Step two, you got to purify it further to create polysilicon. And then step three, you take what's called an ingot, which is a rod of polysilicon, all the way to the module step. So if you're driving down the street and you see solar panels, that's called a solar module. Okay. So from that ingot step to the module, we treat that as one step because that's how companies are typically vertically integrated along that, where you take the rod, you cut it up, you create wafers. You take the wafers, put electrical conducing material around them, okay, and then lay them out together. That's a cell. And then you put the glass on top, the frame around it. That's the module, okay? So, but we'll treat that all as one step. Ingot to module is one step. Polysilicon is one step. Raw material is another step. The raw material step is the most labor intensive. That's where we think the most forced labor is, right? There's swarms of people just involved in the mining operations. Okay. And 33% of the world's raw materials for solar comes from this province. But many companies that produce polysilicon would buy from Hoshin, from this company. And this leads to another issue where what if you're a company, right? And you buy from a lot of different places, but one of those places is Xinjiang. So then you have what we call mixing, and that's an issue that you need to deal with. You want to separate out or keep, or ideally stop buying um, products from Xinjiang to help alleviate the issue. And then at the polysilicon step, about 50% of the world's polysilicon comes from this province. Much of the raw materials are bought within the province, of course. And once again, you have an issue where what if you're making on that third step, you're making materials on that third step, do you buy from Xinjiang and buy from others, right? And that's really the state of the industry. So it wasn't that people are maybe only buying from Xinjiang, but they're at least partially buying materials made in Xinjiang. So you mix it all together, and so up to 97% of the world's solar panels had these inputs that are made with forced labor somewhere along the supply chain. And the reason why it's up to 97% is 97% of the wafers, which was one of the steps in that third bucket that I described, is done in China. They've dominated the wafer production, and that means everything before it, including polysilicon and the raw material stuff, are likely to be made in China. So in June 2021, the US government banned Hoshin products from coming into the US. And we've had forced labor, the United States has had forced labor laws on the books since about 1930, where you can import materials made with forced labor into the US. So this was a specific uh, uh, border law that targeted this particular company because it's sort of like the source, right? So it reaches through the whole industry with these raw materials. So that was a good first step. The challenge, of course, is that it's very difficult to track and China can companies can forge documents, say they're not using it when they are. It's hard to create that pure supply within China that doesn't use a low cost provider, a very big provider of the raw material.
And Reggie, one follow-up question: with banning this company, if 97% still somehow getting inputs from there, does banning the company actually do anything?
So what it does is it slowly forces the industry to change. So the next step, so that was June 2021, December 2021, the president signed into law what's called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. And what this does is it expands beyond Hoshin, but essentially any products made in Xinjiang are assumed to be made using forced labor. And so what we're seeing, this is what's happening. The solar supply chain is shifting. And it's positive to create that clean product that's forced labor free within the industry. And so what we're seeing is manufacturing move to Southeast Asia from start to finish. So the before this particular act and before the Hoshin WRO, most of the production was done in China up to the wafer step. And then those wafers, that 97% of the wafers, were then shipped around the world to create cells and modules. So we even have cell and module manufacturing here in the US using Chinese wafers, or module manufacturing using Southeast Asian or Chinese cells. So most of it, and some people claim about 70% of the value was in China, and then it would go to Southeast Asia to be completed and then shipped to the US. That was the current, because we've actually had tariffs on Chinese production for many years. The new configuration that we're seeing of the supply chain, which is encouraging, is that we're getting our polysilicon from Germany and the United States that is presumably not using any raw inputs from Xinjiang, like the sand and the metallurgical silicon. That's coming in, and they're actually making the wafers, the cells and the modules in Southeast Asia, and then that'll get shipped to the US. Now, here's what our message to the industry has been. That is a great step, because then we can now say that the panel that we have in our hand, the solar panel that we have in our hand, was not touched with forced labor. However, we would like to see things get even a step further, where we can say the company that we bought the panel from has no involvement with forced labor in Xinjiang. So if I take you back to those three steps, there's one company that you would buy a module from today that we have evidence of that they operate with forced labor in Xinjiang. Okay, there's only one company. That's really good. So if you were to go buy a solar panel right now, if anyone were going to do that, then they wouldn't have forced labor directly under their employ. In the second step is many companies, and the third step, many companies. So what we proposed to the industry was, let's do a progressive phase out of companies that use forced labor, starting with, okay, don't buy from that one company that does, right, that directly uses, that you buy from. And then don't buy from module makers, that third step, that have polysilicon production that uses forced labor directly. And then finally, don't buy from the module makers that use raw materials that directly use forced labor. And we would hope that in that process, as purchasing power shifts the industry, that companies that have direct use of forced labor would take remedial actions, because they want to supply to the market, and would join companies that are producing in accordance with human rights. So the government sort of stepped in with these other laws with a bit of a different approach, but it's accomplishing the clean product that we can get. So it's taking time for that to develop. We don't have enough today to supply our needs, but this was a recent development. The law just went into just became sort of active in June 2022, so
Wow.
literally last month. And so we're starting to see what that means um, for the industry, and if panels can start to come in. But that's what we're seeing, which is hopeful. We still have a long ways to go because we need to get more capacity, and we need to be able to supply other areas of the world with forced labor-free panels, not just the U.S.
Well, the scale of the various industries that you indicated or you gave as examples at least. So solar is one, cotton production is another, tomato paste production is another. I would imagine we have ready substitutes around the world for other sorts of tomatoes and tomato paste, and to a large extent also for cotton. Though I imagine a lot of the clothing that we purchase manufactured in China is using Chinese sourced and Xinjiang sourced cotton as well. That's a supposition. I haven't, don't know that, and maybe you do. But on the side of with respect to the quartzite, which is the raw material fundamentally for this, are there other abundant supplies of quartzite around the world that are economically obtainable?
Yes, there are. The manufacturing process is very uh, it requires a high level of diligence to create the quality that you need, and this is at each step of the supply chain. So you want high quality quartzite, you want to produce high quality polysilicon, and Chinese companies have worked to increase their quality. A lot of our polysilicon production in Germany or the US, for example, is actually made for use in chips, in semiconductor chips, because it requires such a high quality level. And we're seeing some of those companies revert back to also producing polysilicon used in solar panels. There is outside of Xinjiang, outside of this province, uh, roughly 67% or two-thirds of the world's quartzite production. So that's good. The real limiting factor is that wafer step. So once you take that rod and you have to cut it and create the wafer, that is what needs to shift outside of the world. Because even if we have, for example, cell and module manufacturing in the US, the question is, where are you getting the wafer from? And that answer is still China. Even if you're in Southeast Asia, that answer is still China. And so
Is
Chinese companies, I'm sorry?
is it China because of the cost of labor, or well, not labor, but I guess they're getting labor free because they're forced labor, right? But is
Yeah,
that why? Is they're
that's
just so
part of
much
it.
cheaper?
That's part of it. They scale, right? Economies of scale. China is the largest solar market in the world. They can have the best economies of scale, lower production, and uh, undercut production in other countries, right? And they've done that for in other industries as well. It's a combination of their cheaper labor, their scale, the government subsidies to help them with R&D to produce better manufacturing processes. And in Xinjiang, you have government subsidies, and the government, by the way, pays companies, they subsidize companies to take forced labor. This is a forced labor scheme that I say, this is not your grandma's forced labor. This is not a kid that happened to sort of get dragged into a Bangladeshi a sweatshop to make clothing or something like that. This is not um, a localized issue of forced labor in some supplier to a major clothing company. This comes right from Xi Jinping on down. This is a concerted effort by the Chinese government to control and oppress this particular group of people, and that's why the scale is so massive. The um, uh, the issue of um, you know subsidies, subsidizing R&D, paying for the labor, and actually subsidizing electricity. So it's a very energy intensive process. And so if you can get cheaper electricity, which they actually have a lot of coal that they're using in this province, it's very rich in natural resources to make the polysilicon. So those factors combined make it the lowest cost provider of this particular material. However, it's no longer really an issue because we've seen inflation across everything, including polysilicon. Polysilicon prices have actually tripled from sort of steady state before the pandemic, and that means that other countries are now cost competitive, even with higher labor or higher energy production. So that's a good thing. Of course, the cost for solar panels has gone up, but it's still very competitive compared to alternatives such as natural gas or coal or nuclear, because solar is a low cost form of electricity.
So, Reggie, what you've outlined is a multi-pronged approach to try to address this, and incremental, of course, as well. Much of it driven by the political process to put in place sort of prohibitions on this or on that. One of the things that's often been effective is to develop in other areas where human rights where human rights violations as part of the value creation process is that you make consumers aware of it, and you then provide them with an easily recognizable validation of the products that they're actually going out and purchasing. So, this has the good housekeeping seal of approval as something that has not been produced using any of these contributions from the forced labor sector in China. Do you see any sort of emerging, third-party validation that could be applied to this to give, because which consumer, whether it's an industrial or household consumer or a local solar panel installation company or whatever the case might be, how do they easily obtain the necessary information to help them make a conscientious purchasing decision here?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say the first thing that companies and individuals want to do and should do is ask where their panels are coming from and how they know that they're not being touched by forced labor from China and particularly Xinjiang. That will go a long way to encouraging companies to continue to work to free themselves of this issue. So what we're seeing right now on the utility scale side is companies scrambling to buy this Southeast Asian, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Cambodia supply of solar panels that is completely free of Chinese inputs. So I mentioned, it uses the polysilicon from Germany or US, comes into Southeast Asia, and they complete the whole process. It's free of Chinese inputs. For the residential solar market, the supply chain is a little bit different. It's actually been dominated by more um, Japanese or Korean companies that can potentially control more where the inputs come within China, because China does have polysilicon production outside of the province. They do have wafer production, of course, outside of the province. So it's sort of like there's some production that might not have forced labor and some that does. And so companies that aren't Chinese owned or uh, you know only in China will presumably have more say in where they can buy materials from. So that's encouraging for the
So in that
residential
case, for
market
example, a Korean
that
joint venture or a Japanese joint venture with a local Chinese company then has a clear insight into what the actual sourcing process is what you're saying. Okay.
better insight. That's right. And more ability to control that and monitor that. I think the residential side, it's still an issue, but there's more avenues to abatement and taking remedial action. And because the market is a lot smaller, you don't need, that 3% of wafer capacity outside of China. That can go a long way to providing the panels that are needed for that market. And that, of course, is also growing. So the residential market does have some issues, but it less issues on this front. The utility scale side, and maybe to give you just the magnitude of panels we're talking about, 1 gigawatt, you need over 2 million panels. The United States is expected to install this year roughly 23 gigawatts of solar. So you kind of do the math, it's like 48 or so, 40, we'll call it 40 to 50 million solar panels, right? So it's a massive amount.
Just so we can picture this, the
By
dimensions of
2030,
one panel in this definition is how large a panel?
well, the dimensions could change based off of course, the manufacturer, but you could picture it as being roughly 5 feet
Okay,
by
that's what we're talking about. So
3 feet.
that's the kinds of things you'll see set up on those tilting arms that'll keep rotating toward the sun. So yeah, interesting.
That's right. We need
Hmm.
millions. We need millions of them every single year to provide our solar energy that we're building out all across the country. And the reason why, just a quick note on this, the reason why solar is expected to become sort of like the new oil is because the sun shines everywhere. I mean, of course, some climates are cloudier than others, as opposed to wind, where you need to have a steady wind, somewhere in the Great Plains or on top of a mountain, right? But if you could imagine like a wind outside of your house, I don't know, it gets really windy every week, maybe, right? But the sun is shining every day or every other day, right? So that's why solar, very practically, is expected to overtake wind and become a more important technology. So we're going to need millions of solar panels. Ideally, we would see manufacturing come here to the U.S. as well, and we would like to see manufacturing jobs, more supply chain involvement here. Of course, there's machinery and parts and pieces that need to get made to support that, and so it could lead to more economic opportunity for folks here in the U.S. But in the current situation that we have, we're encouraged that we're seeing shifts outside of Xinjiang to to pull the supply chain away from forced labor. And this all happened in the last year. Like I said, if we were speaking a year ago, it was up to 97%. And today we're actually starting to see panels being produced that don't have forced labor anyway, and we can verify it, importantly. And so that's the important piece there, but it's still a small fraction of the total panels being made, but it's a growing fraction. And so we're excited about that. And we want to keep seeing this progress get made. And like I said, for consumers, you want to ask, because that gives companies more impetus, more motivation to keep working towards this and disrupt the status quo.
So the perpetrators, obviously, of this evil are undoubtedly aware of the efforts that are being made now to more closely scrutinize the sources of these materials and at these various stages of the production process, as you identified. And I would imagine they're undertaking some degree of countermeasures to the extent that they can, so that they continue to be able to produce and monetize this forced labor without necessarily detection. What if any countermeasures are they taking, and what recourse does the rest of the world have to not have our efforts to um, essentially make this process and this practice unprofitable for the government there? What steps are we taking to counter the countermeasures, if any?
Yeah. So the government in China actually has a law that says if you comply with Western sanctions or with sanctions from the U.S., there could be severe penalties, and you can't, essentially, if you're a company in China, do this. Now, what we've found is that Chinese companies can tell the government, our customers want us to do something, and this is why it's so important for industry to ask for solar panel buyers, whether you're an individual or if you're a company, to ask the suppliers, to take remedial actions or to use polysilicon and other inputs that are not made in Xinjiang in their supply, because then they can just say our customers want this, not the U.S. government, but our customers. And that's the difference. And even here at Eventide, we are not against making things in China, right? We're against using forced labor in China. We're against using forced labor anywhere. And that's the issue that we're having. We want to attack the forced labor, not maybe the government or or a Chinese company, for example. And I know people, uh, have various political beliefs and or things of maybe issues with China, and that's fine. But we're looking at this from a very pragmatic, a very practical approach of attacking forced labor. That's what we're against here at Eventide, and that's why we've invested the resources to educate the market, to seek to educate the market on the issue, and help companies hopefully develop solutions and help industry develop solutions to get this completely removed from the supply chain. And so uh, China is sort of taking this as a trade war type of thing. So they're fighting back. I mean, there are some worries that China could maybe stop shipping to the U.S. Right, and this is a broader geopolitical question for the United States. Do we want to be dependent on Chinese or Southeast Asian production, especially considering the Russia-Ukraine crisis? We know that depending on European countries are realizing, hey, depending on Russia really isn't good for our energy. And if we're going to be building out solar, then this really isn't good to be dependent on China. And so that's where domestic manufacturing does make sense. Many companies right now are working to diversify their supply chain. So they'll buy some from China, some from Southeast Asia, some from Mexico, some from the United States, right? So we're seeing manufacturing move around the world to more places to create that supply chain diversification.
You mentioned earlier that tariffs were one mechanism the U.S. government had used in general in its trade relations with China. Has there been a particular effort to elevate those tariffs against solar panel products, either the completed good or parts, as part of this effort to combat this?
Yes. So there actually was uh, a big investigation opened by the Department of Commerce. It is currently under investigation right now that says that China is trying to go around those dumping, and they're trying to go around those existing tariffs by manufacturing in Southeast Asia. It's called anti-dumping countervailing duties tariff. They're trying to go around those and and building in Southeast Asia, and that's why there's so much cell and module production in Southeast Asia today, is because it doesn't have the level of tariff that the Chinese production does. That actually shut down for a couple months panels, many panels from coming to the U.S. to begin with. So this was a huge uproar in the industry. The Biden administration put a freeze on new tariffs for 2 years on solar panels, but the Department of Commerce might not put a new tariff on that production. And so there are these underlying trade dynamics that are going on that could shift the supply chain even more. The long story short is we we need to get the clean supply um, that is verifiably clean supply made somewhere. It would be great to have some of that here in the U.S. It would be good to have some of that in Southeast Asia or other countries. There is room enough. The market is so large that there's room enough for many countries to be involved in this. Another country to watch is India. So India they tariff and are in the process of tariffing so much that they're going to almost shut China completely out and produce their own from start to finish supply chain. And that hopefully will be very free of of forced labor, and they could even potentially be an exporter to the rest of the world. So we're starting to see good movements there. We still have a ways to go, but the trade war backdrop is helping the supply chain shift outside of Xinjiang and outside of these troubled areas of China. That's a brute force method, of course. The industry, might not like that sometimes, but in this case, where we have such you know, a human rights atrocity going on, that any support that we can get to attack that issue is good.
Well, so I'm think. Oh, go ahead, Roshan.
I was going to say, Reggie, with the opportunity you described there, as far as just the growth of solar,
Mhm.
it just seems huge, right? So if for the people listening that are looking for investment ideas and opportunities, what would you say they go look at? I know with compliance and everything, I'm not asking for specific names. I'm just asking for any. How would you guide someone like me that says, where can
Yeah,
I look to
you want
invest
to
in
invest
space?
in companies that are getting high quality solar panels that aren't using forced labor, because those are the companies that are going to have a steady supply, an uninterrupted supply. And even if there are more tariffs put in different places of the world, the price will go up, but the industry is likely to digest it. And so you really want to look for this is where I'm excited to be a part of our work here at Eventide and investing in these companies, looking for companies with reputable supply chains, because this is the resiliency that such a company can bring to the market, where you're going to avoid a lot of headline risk. You can potentially avoid trade issues and headline risk, like I said. And this is part of our philosophy. We want those companies that are aligned in pushing for a cleaner solar supply chain. And so uh, there are repercussions for doing business as usual in a changing world, and in a world that is so increasingly aware of what's happening. For example, there was the release of what's called the Xinjiang police files that documents over thousands of people detained in these camps. And we have eyewitness testimonies. Do you want your company tied to that? Do you want your company to be now visibly associated with this? Children in these camps, 14 years old in these camps. And so there is the need for companies to seriously consider, and for investors to seriously consider these implications in their investment decisions. And for the everyday investor, um, um, to the extent that you can, seek the same, seek the same sort of upstanding firms as well.
So, Reggie, earlier you were talking about the mission that drives Eventide, and I would imagine, while on the one hand this is a a passion for you, and certainly aligns well as with the rest of the folks at Eventide in terms of their passion to try to identify ways in which we can both avoid investing in some direction and possibly invest in other directions. So I would imagine as well then that this is filtering its way through into some of the investment activity of Eventide Investments. Which of the funds take this information that you're producing as a research analyst and appropriate that insight into the portfolio manager's decisions?
Yes, so I contribute to most of our funds. For example, uh, Gilead and uh, EDO, or Equity Dividend Opportunities Fund, are different funds. We now have 8 funds actually, and growing. But I contribute ideas to most of our funds. We do include um, some level of energy and renewable energy in many of our funds, and so this information gets integrated uh, uh, really on constantly as new information comes out. This is what I'm working on. This is what I'm monitoring, and so this has been very helpful for us, not only to look to identify companies that want to take action and are taking action, and then also understanding the industry and what that true growth rate will be going forward, because this has been disruptive, right? We need to essentially shift the supply chain, and it is disruptive, and so that influences how we adjust and think about the industry, and ultimately the companies that we want to own, and the companies that we think will be the leaders in this type of a setting, in this type of a backdrop.
Well, for our listeners, Reggie, this is, we talk about, as I mentioned in the intro, to talk about having a high impact life. And so, whether you've given us ideas today in terms of our direct purchases as well as in our investments, you've also talked about the political process. And so, I would just say that seems like that's another potential area for people to fully direct some of their energies, is to make it known to their representatives that these sorts of things matter to them. But I just want to say, as at least on my behalf, as a personal thank you to that you have committed your life, or at least this chapter of your career, to monitoring these sorts of things and bringing this information not just as a sort of an idle area of awareness, but also bringing it into the investment process. So, because without you and without people like you doing that sort of thing, the rest of us who are looking for an option for investment in a way that aligns with our values around these sorts of things would be denied. We'd have one less opportunity through which to express that through our investments. So thank you very much for what you do. And that passion is that weather forecasting youngster, sort of channeling that all the way through into now this chapter of your life. And I'm really grateful to you for doing that.
Thank you very much, Eric. No, it's great to be here, just to share a little bit of my passion and this information on the solar industry. I'm excited. The future is bright. We are developing new technology innovations that are going to be transformative in how we power the global economy in hopefully a cleaner way with less pollution, hopefully in a cheaper way as well. And it's always an exciting time when you're in the middle of technological innovation, but we've got to do it the right way. We can't sacrifice humans. We can't sacrifice other people to get to this uh, goal, to get this desired outcome. Right? We want to do it in the right way. We've had too many times in human history where we've seen us getting to something potentially better, but doing it in a way that is quite frankly immoral. And so we want to we want to develop a global system of business, and have a global system of business that really respects people and the value, and the intrinsic value, the intrinsic dignity that all people have.
Here, here. How will our listeners, if they,
Yeah, that is.
Rich, let me just finish this thought and you go ahead. If our listeners would like to learn more about this area and some of the research that's done, has Eventide or have you developed any research products for consumers that would help them and investors help them better understand this in the specifics?
Yes, we have a report on this issue at eventideinvestments.com. So Eventide investments.com. If you go on the website, you will be able to find, yep, there it is. You will be able to find our report there that we have crafted for advisors and the general public to read about this issue in depth. And the report really outlines, one, how forced labor is rolled into the solar supply chain; two, the backdrop of oppression in Xinjiang; and three, an approach that we're proposing to remove forced labor from the supply chain. It's a quick read. It's a 5-minute read, but it will give you what you need to know.
Fantastic. And how I'll ask you one more question, but Roshan, you were going to ask a question as well.
Well, no, I was just going to echo what you were saying and say, Reggie, thank you. And I didn't know the connection, how a meteorologist from Reggie became a research analyst at Eventide. But as you describe it, it sounds like just such a smooth or direct path that I didn't see
Yeah.
coming.
Thank you,
No,
Reggie. That's great.
you never know where life is going to take you, but it's taken me
Yeah,
great places.
Well, that's wonderful. And if people want to
that's
follow you,
wonderful.
are you active on Twitter or any other, sorts of media where they could kept apprised of what sorts of new things you're discovering and making note?
Well, I mean, I do have social media. I'm on Twitter, but I don't do much of the professional updates there. Most of that will
Okay.
come through the website. Uh, we do have potentially some things in the works around just energy and different things. Sometimes I'll do a webinar um, or an energy update, things of that nature. That's the best way right now. Um, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, that would be the best way, just through the website and materials that Eventide is releasing.
Terrific.
Well, and I'm not sure if you do updates on there, but I just followed you
There you
on
go. That's another good one.
LinkedIn.
Yep.
So
All right.
yeah,
Fantastic. Well, listen, listeners, thank you so much for sticking with us. This has been a longer episode than we often will do, but we felt like it was an important one. If you have other questions that you have for us, and particularly how you might implement some of this in your own planning and investing, definitely reach out to us. All of our information is at our website as well. So that's retirementlifestyleshow.com. As well, if you have found interest in this uh, topic, we have earlier episodes that also deal with values based investing. Everything from, as we mentioned in talking with Reggie earlier, a previous conversation with Jason Meyer, also from Eventide Investments. And then we've had other conversations with those that are involved in direct impact investing, dealing with sex trafficking, with poverty, widows, orphans, community development, and much, much more in other parts of the world. So you'll be able to find a lot of that past learning that we've all done together on the website. So thank you so much, Reggie, again for joining us. And listeners, if you've liked this episode, we hope you have. We'll ask you to share this episode with others that would equally benefit from learning more about ways in which we are collaborating as an investment community to combat this sort of horror in a major and growing area of the the renewable energy segment of the economy. And until next time, thanks so much for being with us.